killers to be freed from prison under the Good Friday Agreements. He had been sentenced to 30 years for 6 murders. 3 of them were carried out during this attack on an IRA funeral in Milltown Cemetery in Belfast in 1988.
He stood at the edge of the crowd, a ghost among mourners. He wasn't there for last rites or solemn goodbyes. He was there to send a message written in blood and shrapnel. In a few seconds, the sacred quiet of a cemetery would be shattered by the crack of a pistol and the deafening roar of grenades. A sacred gathering for the dead was about to become a hunting ground, broadcast live to a horrified global audience. This wasn't an act of war between armies on a distant battlefield. This was one man, turning a place of rest into his personal arena of terror, creating a spectacle of violence so audacious it would be burned into history. To understand the inferno of March 16, 1988, you must first understand the volatile atmosphere that engulfed Northern Ireland. The year was a pressure cooker of sectarian animosity, and 2 key events had turned up the heat to an unbearable level. The first was the Enniskillen bombing. Just 4 months earlier, in November 1987, the Provisional IRA detonated a bomb during a Remembrance Day ceremony. The blast was devastating, killing 11 people, mostly elderly Protestant civilians, and injuring over 60 more. A 12th victim would later die after spending 13 years in a coma. The attack, targeting a solemn commemoration of war dead, caused widespread revulsion across communities and was condemned internationally. For many loyalists, it was an unforgivable act of barbarism that demanded a brutal response. The second event happened just 10 days before the cemetery attack. On March 6, 3 members of an IRA active service unit, Sean Savage, Daniel McCann, and Mairead Farrell, were shot and killed by British SAS soldiers on the streets of Gibraltar. The British government stated the 3 were planning a major car bomb attack on military personnel. However, the operation, code-named Operation Flavius, was deeply controversial. The 3 were found to be unarmed, and numerous eyewitnesses claimed they were shot without warning, with some even alleging they were shot while trying to surrender or after they were already on the ground. For Republicans, this was not a counter-terrorism operation, it was a state-sanctioned execution. The Gibraltar 3, as they became known, were instantly hailed as martyrs. Their joint funeral in Belfast was therefore more than just a burial, it was a major political statement, a mass mobilization of Republican grief and defiance. Thousands were expected to attend. In an attempt to lower tensions, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, RUC, and the British Army agreed to an unprecedented hands-off approach, keeping a low profile and staying away from the procession itself. This decision was meant to prevent the violent clashes that had marred previous Republican funerals. But for one man watching from the shadows, this security vacuum wasn't a gesture of peace. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. March 16. The raw, biting grief in Milltown Cemetery was a tangible presence, mingling with the scent of damp earth and the palpable undercurrent of political fury. Thousands of mourners formed a dense sea of black coats and somber faces around the Republican plot. High above, 2 police helicopters hovered like birds of prey, their cameras recording the scene below. As the third coffin, draped in the Irish tricolour, was carefully lowered into the grave, a fragile sense of dignity held. At that moment, Michael Stone, a loyalist paramilitary who had blended in with the mourners, made his move. He was armed with a Browning 9mm pistol, a .357 Magnum revolver, and 7 Soviet-made RGD-5 fragmentation grenades. He wore no mask and had made no clear plan for his escape. He hurled 2 grenades toward the gravesite where Sinn Féin leaders Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness stood. For a split second, the sound of the first explosion was mistaken by some for a traditional paramilitary volley of shots fired in tribute. That illusion lasted only until the screams began. The blast sent a shockwave of panic through the crowd as shrapnel tore through the air. People scrambled for their lives, diving for cover behind the cold marble of the tombstones. Then, Stone began firing his pistol into the terrified, scattering crowd. It was absolute pandemonium. But amidst the terror, a new resolve took hold. As Stone began to flee toward the nearby M1 motorway, dozens of unarmed men rose from behind the headstones and began to chase him. What followed was a surreal and horrifying spectacle, all captured by news cameras. Stone ran a chaotic zigzag pattern through the field of graves, periodically turning to fire at his pursuers and lob his remaining grenades. Bullets ricocheted off stone crosses, and each grenade blast sent deadly fragments of metal and shattered marble flying through the crowd. More than 60 people were wounded. The injured included a 10-year-old boy, a grandmother in her 70s, and a pregnant mother of 4. 3 of the men who gave chase would not survive the day. Thomas McCurleen, a 20-year-old civilian, was shot and killed. John Murray, a 26-year-old civilian, was also shot dead as he tried to stop the lone attacker. And Caimin MacBride, a 30-year-old IRA member, was the third to be killed. Stone finally reached the motorway, his ammunition seemingly spent. He tried to hijack a car but was swarmed by the enraged crowd that had caught up to him. They beat him severely until RUC officers arrived, intervening to rescue him and place him under arrest. As he was being taken away, he allegedly told police, "The fucking thing's jammed, or else I would have got more of the bastards." The one-man assault was over, but its devastating impact was just beginning to unfold. What kind of man walks into a cemetery with the intent to commit mass murder? To understand the massacre, you must understand the man and the violent world that forged him. Michael Anthony Stone was born in Birmingham, England, in 1955 to English parents. After his mother left and his father joined the Merchant Navy, he was raised by his aunt and uncle in loyalist areas of Northern Ireland, first in Ballyhalbert and later on the Brainial estate in East Belfast. By the time he was a teenager, the Troubles were tearing the region apart. The conflict pitted 2 communities against each other, Unionists, who were overwhelmingly Protestant and fought to remain part of the United Kingdom, and Nationalists, who were almost entirely Catholic and sought a united Ireland. Both sides had powerful paramilitary groups, like the Loyalist Ulster Defence Association, UDA, and the Republican Provisional IRA, waging vicious campaigns of violence. Stone grew up in a hardline Loyalist environment and his entry into that world was early. At just 16, he joined the UDA, one of the largest and most active Loyalist paramilitary organizations. He graduated quickly from sectarian street gangs and brawls to targeted killings, describing himself as a freelance Loyalist paramilitary. Before his attack at Milltown, he had already murdered at least 3 other Catholic civilians in the preceding years. Within Loyalist circles, he was considered one of their most ruthless and effective operators. His stated motive for the Milltown attack was direct revenge for the Enniskillen bombing for months prior. He later told a journalist he saw the high-profile funeral of the Gibraltar 3 as the perfect target, a symbolic retaliation. As he saw it, the IRA had desecrated a British memorial, so he would attack what he considered the IRA's equivalent. He planned the mission alone, but a senior UDA member supplied him with the weapons the night before. His objective was clear: kill the Republican leadership, specifically Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, and cause maximum chaos. In the fractured, paranoid world of the Troubles, where every act of violence was met with a counter-reaction, Stone's attack was the brutal endpoint of a life steeped in sectarian hatred. He wasn't a random madman, he was a product of his environment, a willing soldier in a dirty war who saw a funeral not as a time for grief, but as a prime strategic opportunity. The shockwaves from Stone's attack spread instantly, creating a terrifying feedback loop of violence. The city, already simmering with rage, was about to boil over. Just 3 days later, on March 19, a funeral was held for Caimin MacBride, one of the men Stone had killed. As the cortege made its way through West Belfast, 2 plainclothed British Army corporals, Derek Wood and David Howes, mistakenly drove their silver Volkswagen Passat directly into the path of the funeral procession. The crowd, already on high alert and fearing another Loyalist attack, became hysterical. Believing the soldiers were assassins, dozens of people surrounded and attacked the car. Corporal Wood drew his service pistol and fired a warning shot into the air, but this only intensified the crowd's fury. The 2 soldiers were dragged from the vehicle, beaten, and stripped. In scenes of horrifying brutality, also captured on camera, they were taken to a nearby waste ground where they were executed by the IRA. The corporal's killings became one of the most infamous and disturbing events of the entire conflict, a direct and brutal ripple effect of the paranoia and rage ignited by Michael Stone just 72 hours earlier. Stone himself, meanwhile, showed no remorse. After his arrest, his first question to police was reportedly, "How many of the bastards did I kill?" In March 1989, he stood trial and was convicted for 6 murders, the 3 at the cemetery and 3 prior killings, along with a host of other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison, with sentences totaling 684 years. The judge recommended he serve a minimum of 30 years, calling his crimes a series of cold-blooded and calculated assassinations. For his actions, Stone became a loyalist icon inside and outside prison walls. The story should have ended there, with Stone locked away for life. But in the complex landscape of the Northern Ireland peace process, his path took an unexpected turn. In 2000, after serving just over a decade, Michael Stone was released from prison under the terms of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. This landmark peace deal, which largely ended the 30-year conflict, included a highly controversial clause for the early release of paramilitary prisoners from both Loyalist and Republican sides. It was a bitter pill for many victims to swallow, but was seen as a necessary compromise to secure peace. Upon his release, Stone expressed support for the peace process but offered no apologies for his violent past. Peace, however, did not seem to suit him. For a time, he pursued a career as an artist, selling paintings he began creating in prison. But in November 2006, Stone was back in the headlines. In a bizarre and audacious act, he attempted to storm the Parliament buildings at Stormont, the home of the Northern Ireland Assembly. He was armed with an imitation pistol, knives, an axe, a garrote, and several viable homemade bombs. His intended targets were, once again, Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. He was tackled and disarmed by security guards in the building's revolving doors. At his trial, Stone bizarrely claimed the entire episode was an act of performance art, a defense the judge dismissed as wholly undeserving of belief. He was convicted of attempted murder and sent back to prison with a 16-year sentence. After a protracted legal battle, and despite passionate challenges from the families of his victims, Michael Stone was released on parole for a second and final time in January 2021. If you found this look into a dark chapter of history compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth stories like this one. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. The Milltown Cemetery Massacre remains one of the most visceral and shocking events of the Troubles, not only for its sheer brutality but because it was captured on film for the entire world to see. It laid bare the raw, sectarian hatred that fueled the conflict and demonstrated how quickly the cycle of retaliation could spiral into even greater tragedy. Michael Stone, the lone attacker, became an enduring symbol, a loyalist hero to a radical few, a callous murderer to the vast majority. His subsequent releases from prison, punctuated by the almost farcical attack on Stormont, paint a picture of a man who couldn't, or wouldn't, leave the war behind. His story is a stark and chilling reminder of the individuals at the heart of historical conflicts, and the long, complicated shadows they cast long after the guns have supposedly fallen silent.